5.
Curry hits it 3.
4.
Just for the try. Deep left field.
3.
Patrick hit by Watt. Sack number 10.
2.
Messi with a record-breaking goal.
1.
Welcome to BSS Sports. Now, here are your hosts, Steve and Trevor.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of BSS Sports. My name is Steven Schill with the ever-lovely Trevor Struthers. Going to talk a bit of baseball, going to talk a fair bit about NFL, and just, you know what, whatever else we feel like. So, it is a Tuesday, so just be aware, normally we're on Mondays at 2:30 here on 91X, but because of the holiday, we're shaking things up. So, if we're looking down the football world, you're seeing a few interesting stories. Number 1, Kansas City 5-0. Number 2, New York Giants 0-5. And then the San Francisco 49ers 0-5 as well, but I guess you kind of expected that one. The Giants, you know, with Odell Beckham Jr., you thought, hey, you know what, this is going to happen. But last night, he goes down, he's injured. I don't know how long he's going to be out for, but it didn't look too great. And then they lost to, and quote, the Los Angeles Chargers. Not San Diego, Los Angeles. Still don't really like the move there, but either way. Trev, the Giants just going a whole heck of a lot of nowhere this year.
I can tell you're really pumped up for what's going to eventually be the Las Vegas Raiders as well. But anyway, back to the Giants. Man, if their season wasn't already over, it's definitely over. Odell Beckham Jr., I have him in fantasy, so this is almost like a personal loss for myself. But I mean, I just cut him last night. He broke. I can't remember the name of what it's called, or it might have just been his ankle. I think it's J.J. Watt's injury is the one. I can't think of what the bone is called, but anyways, it's the fibula. I'm pretty sure he broke. Anyways, he broke something. OBJ did, and he needs surgery, so that's going to happen. But that's not the only thing here for the Giants. I mean, this is a Giants team that they have to rely on that pass game because they really don't have any reminiscent of a running game at all on offense. And, I mean, he bites the dust. Brandon Marshall left that game with an injury. Could also be long-term. And Sterling Shepard left that game as well. And this may be, like he could very well probably play next week most likely. But, I mean, 3 receivers left that game with an injury for the Giants, and 2 of them, it may be somewhat long-term. They're already 0-5, and that's, with these players healthy for the majority of the season. So, I mean, hey, maybe the Giants end up with the first overall pick in the NFL draft. I think at this point right now, this is where the mindset has to shift to.
Now, speaking of injuries as well, J.J. Watt went down. I don't know why, some of the biggest names in the NFL are going down at once. But the thing with J.J. Watt is, isn't he getting paid, an absolute stupid amount of money? Is there some kind of clause in football? I don't even know if you know this, but if you get injured, you get paid less. Because this is basically paying somebody to do nothing. I 100% get it. You got hurt on the job so you can be compensated. But when we're talking about millions of dollars, and you're the biggest ship, you're the director of the department, you're taking care of the defense, and then you're out, that causes problems. Is there any kind of kind of contract reducement at that point?
Yeah, that makes a great point. Definitely from a team perspective, obviously it'd be a lot better for them. But I mean, the players would be incredibly hesitant, I feel like, to even go for that. And then you'd have your teams, and this is always the interesting thing about sports and free agency and that. Then you'll have your teams that'll be like, yeah, we won't do that to you. We'll give you the full contract. If you get hurt, you're still getting paid what you signed for, everything like that. There's going to be no sort of cut off if you get injured. And yeah, he's getting paid a ridiculous amount of money, but not only to be a fantastic football player for one of the better defenses in the league, and obviously now he can't do that for basically the rest of the season, but he's also the face of that franchise, and we saw the kind of effect that he had on that community as well after the hurricane and the hurricane relief that he was able to do. And I don't know what the total was, but he raised a ton of money for that city and the relief effort. And so J.J. Watt, first off, great guy, it seems like, right? So this is a horrible thing to have happen to him, of all people. But it's like he's an incredible guy for that community as well, right? So you're not just paying the player, you're paying the person, and he's one of the better ones in the NFL.
Now, one of the more interesting games, if you will, were the Packers and the Cowboys. Cowboys looked like they were taking the game. They were leading going into the fourth, and then the fourth, the Packers went to town, scored 20 points to win 35-31, and now are at 4-1. And people kind of thought the Cowboys were going to do a bit better this season. Right now, they're 2-3, but Dak Prescott continues to impress.
Yeah, he does, and I mean, maybe a bit of the struggling has to do with the fact that these guys now are in their sophomore year, and I mean, there's that term, the sophomore slump, and not necessarily that Prescott is slumping. Ezekiel Elliott, for the most part, too, is having an all right season. I mean, he had the one game where he had like 7 rushing yards, and just what was a horrible game all around for him, and maybe even Elliott couldn't even be playing with this whole thing that's going on away from the football field. But with Dak Prescott, I mean, he still seems to be a guy that is clicking, and I mean, how he slipped so far back in the draft, I'll never know. Speaking of slipping so far back in the draft, how did Aaron Jones go in the fifth round with what he's doing? I mean, he comes in for an injured Ty Montgomery in that backfield for the Packers, and he rushes for over 100 yards against the Cowboys, and had a couple of touchdowns, I believe, as well. I mean, Aaron Jones, I'm looking at him almost in fantasy. The only fear there is that Ty Montgomery eventually will be healthy, and then the Packers have sounded like too they want to kind of come away from Ty Montgomery. So Aaron Jones does get I guess a bit more of an opportunity that way, but eventually he'll be sharing the load, which will be great for the Packers overall as a football team. I mean, this is a team that's probably going to dominate their division. Detroit's starting to slow down a bit, so they're probably going to dominate that division, win the division, get into the playoffs. And, if they're firing on all cylinders, I mean, Devontae Adams suffered a concussion on a brutal hit that deserved a suspension last week, and he goes out there this week and scores 2 touchdowns, including the game winner with under a minute left. And, I mean, what more can you say about Aaron Rodgers? He does it again. I mean, this is no doubt my favorite quarterback to watch in football, and I mean, there was a reason why I made sure he was on my fantasy team a year ago, and he ends up being the top fantasy quarterback last year. Like, this is a guy that does not disappoint anybody in any situation. It's just sometimes, when they do end up getting eliminated from the playoffs, it's because the guy can't do everything. But Aaron Rodgers is a fantastic football player, and he proved it again this week.
Now, switching over to baseball, I have to admit, and I think we've actually talked about it a couple of times, I don't know what it is about this season or in general, but I just seem to not want to follow baseball, I guess would be like the correct term here. And I mean, I don't know if that's because they're making like ridiculous amounts of money. Subconsciously, like, I mean, I don't ever think like, oh my god, I'm not going to watch this because of the money, or just I don't feel like the entertainment value is there as much. Like, I mean, I totally appreciate the game. I get that sometimes they're trying to like speed it up, but I mean, I like the strategicness of it, and I don't know. It feels like it's the one sport that really doesn't catch my eye as much as I think it should during playoff time. All the other ones, like football, hockey, basketball, I want to watch. But baseball this year, I just don't want to. Trev, are you watching any of the games?
I've been paying very far attention to them, if that makes sense. But, I mean, it does kind of – it is interesting from the standpoint of I really want to see the TV numbers from the National League wildcard game where you had Arizona and Colorado playing. They don't necessarily strike me as two fan bases that have been successful at all in the past year. So it's great that they've been able to both, qualify for that game. But with that being said, they're not exactly, the Dodgers and the Mets. They're not like big market teams with big fan bases. So I'd be curious to see what that was like. And I do wonder if in Toronto we're a little in this area in general, in Ontario, if we're a little baseballed out at this point. After the last couple of years with the Blue Jays, and it's not like the Blue Jays had short seasons by any means. They came one step short of the World Series both years. That we've been in a bit of a baseball coma, which is funny. I mentioned a coma coming off of Thanksgiving weekend. I've been in a turkey coma for the last couple of days, but so it's maybe we're in a bit of a baseball coma, and it's taking some time. I know I took a bit of a backseat this year when it came to watching baseball, just in general. That fell behind some other priorities. So I do wonder if that has something to do with our personal interest in it as the overall interest in baseball. There is, I mean, you're going to get lots of views, no doubt, for these games throughout the states. Why? Because you got the Red Sox, you've got the Yankees, you've got the Cubs, you've got the Dodgers. I think the Washington Nationals have a solid following. So you got your big market teams in there that are going to no doubt tune in and watch and see how things go. It's just you do wonder at some point, 162 games is a lot throughout a baseball season. It's a pretty long season overall, from April to basically the beginning of November is when the World Series wraps up. So, I mean, it's a long time to be invested into one sport. You do wonder if that's going to change in years come eventually, or if baseball is just going to stay the course. I mean, a lot of the things with sports in general is you try to keep it to a tradition. Soccer's a lot like that. You're a soccer guy. And so this is kind of a baseball tradition, to have 162 games into the playoffs and try to get the whole playoffs done in a month. So, I mean, at least in that sense, the playoffs are short, but man, is the regular season in baseball way too long.
There was actually this poll that was done by Fox News in the States, and they showed in August for sports favorability, MLB was highest, followed by NFL, and then NBA, and then in September, when these protests really started to kick off, that MLB was still first, but then NBA was in second, and NFL dropped about 10%, more than 10% actually, in favorability. Don't know if that's the same thing, or if just because it's playoffs and the NBA season's kicking off, well, the NFL is kind of in mid-season right now. Not sure. But switching over to basketball, who watches the Detroit Pistons apart from me? Probably nobody. But with that being said, Trev, interesting point. Kind of talked to you last night about it. Andre Drummond, one of the players for the Pistons. He's a center, really good player, probably the best on the entire team. No, he is the best on the entire team. I don't even know why I'm saying that. But I'm seeing a lot of similarities between him and Calvin Johnson, formerly of the Detroit Lions. If you don't know who either of these guys are, basically Calvin Johnson was one of the elite receivers in the NFL, but then the Lions really didn't give him much of a team, I guess would be the term. So he was always like top 3 receiving yards, but he never, was able to crack the playoffs, or if they did, they kind of got knocked out in the first round. Now, same kind of thing with the Pistons. The Pistons are in the Eastern Conference of the NBA, which if you've heard, probably have, it's super, super weak. But Pistons still, for whatever reason, still cannot get into the playoffs. We're having coaching changes. We've seen Avery Bradley come into the team this year. That's basically the only new addition. So I'm getting super nervous that we are going to turn Andre Drummond into the Calvin Johnson, where Calvin Johnson actually retired because the team wasn't doing anything and he was just getting hurt doing it.
I do wonder if he's maybe kind of almost changed his mind on that decision. The Lions aren't a bad football team this year, and they do have some options in that passing game. But to the Pistons, yeah, I was saying to you last night, what they should do is they should trade Drummond and maximize that trade value now. Why risk him becoming older and not as good of a basketball player if you don't plan on winning right now? And that kind of tends to seem to be what they want to do here. So, you trade him, you maximize that value, you build around, younger guys that you want to try to bring in, or you try to build around him right now and actually try to go for something at some point. If anything, try to make a playoff spot and hope for the best. They could try to do that too. Pick up a couple of players. You mentioned bringing in Avery Bradley. I mean, I don't think that hurts, but you got to kind of build around him and make it a better team. It's a lot easier to build around a basketball team than it is a football team because, obviously the number of players is drastically different. So a lot easier to build a basketball team. You just got to go out and find the right ways to do it. I'm not saying it's completely easy. I might make it, it's easier said than done, but you still have a way to kind of build around this guy. Bring in, a couple of playmaking guards or something, and really try to get something going. Because the East is weak. I mean, that's another thing they're missing out on. The East is weak, and they have a real chance to try to pop in there and if anything, extend their season and see if they can actually do anything in the playoffs and really try to help actually build Andre Drummond's history in the city of Detroit.
That's it for this edition of BSS Sports. Make sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at BSS Sports. Archiving all of our works on YouTube at BSS Productions. For Trevor, Struthers, and myself, Stephen Schill, we'll catch you next Monday.